Well, it's time to begin studying Hebrews, the 6th chapter. And I want to thank Bradley and Nathan for teaching the class a few weeks ago. And I thought they did a good job. And I did survive my backpacking trip out to Wyoming. And if you want to talk to me about it, I'll be glad to talk to you. But it was tough. We traveled backpacked 32 miles above 10,000 feet. I'm getting too old for this. So it was very enjoyable. But the great thing about it is you got to see God's creation and all of the wonderful things that He has made up high in the mountains. So, in Hebrews, we have Jews, and Jews have always been very important to God. They were God's chosen people, and now things have changed. Jesus has been on the scene, and now the Jews, remember on the day of Pentecost, thousands and thousands of individuals were baptized, and a lot of them were Jews, and so the Jews have been increasing, it seems like, in the first century, but now we have some problems arising. And the big scheme of Hebrews, the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 8, is basically the dangers of falling away from the faith. And it's very severe. And then in the verses 9 through 12 is words of encouragement. Now, I know you're thinking, some people have fallen away, and that's discouraging. And then in those verses, the writer of Hebrews encourages the Jews. And then in verses 13 through 17, they need the reassurance of God's promise. Are you sure He's going to keep His promise? Because I know some friends that don't keep promises, but God will always keep His promise. So with all that said and the stage being set, let's start reading in verse 1. Therefore, leaving the elementary teachings about the Christ, let us press on to maturity, not laying, again, a foundation of repentance from the dead works and of faith towards God. Now, going back to the first part of verse 1, the elementary teachings, that's the basic principles. That's the first principles. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, okay, now you got those down, and now let's go into something that's a little bit more mature. Basically, he's saying is, let's get down to work, okay? And the Jews needed that. And verse 2, of instruction about washing and laying on of hands and about the resurrection of the dead and the eternal judgment. Now, in verse 2, is the writer talking about the same thing that your mother always told you? Have you washed your hands before you eat? Is he talking about that kind of washing? Baptism, exactly. And so there's all kinds of baptisms. Well, there's the baptism of John, which is kind of a little confusing. And there's the baptism of being a Christian. So he's going to talk to the Jews about baptism a little bit more and laying on of hands. Now, many times in the first century, and not so much today, but when partaking of a blessing, bless you, my son, you're laying your hands on them. Or maybe performing a miracle. A lot of times in the first century, they would lay their hands on that individuals. And then another thing they would lay their hands on was an orientation. Orientation to a new position. So those are kind of the three things that a lot of times laying on of hands. And continuing, and about the resurrection of the dead and eternal judgment. The resurrection of the dead, that's kind of new to individuals. What do you mean He was dead and now He's alive? And so there's three good points or illustrations of resurrection from the dead, and we won't turn there for time's sake, but in Acts the 2nd chapter, verses 31 through 32, Acts the 10th chapter, verse 40, and then Acts the 13th chapter, verse 33. So here are times that, we need to be reassured of resurrection from the dead. So I think that's interesting. And then in verse 3, there's a phrase here that seems out of character or out of place. Maybe not to you, but it did to me. And this we will do if God permits. And basically he's just saying that, these are the things that we want to talk about, but for providing it's okay with God. Always make sure that it's okay with God. When you do something out in the world, make sure that it's okay with God. So it's just a very quick little reassurance that we need to make sure these things need to get done, providing it's okay with God. So now we go to verse 4. And verse 4 through verse 6 is kind of hard. It's hard in the regard of what we think today. For it is impossible in the case of those who have once been enlightened and have tasted of the heavenly gift and have been made the partakers of the Holy Spirit and have tasted the good word of the Lord and the powers of the age to come and then have fallen away to restore them. Wait, are you saying that, I can be a Christian and then I kind of fall away and it's impossible for me to come back to the Lord? That sounds like what it's saying. What do you think? Well, today, many times, a better way of phrasing that might be, for today, it's highly unlikely that they will come back. Is it impossible as we think of impossible? I don't think so. I think there's always that chance that a person can come back to God and live rightly. But he has a very good point. Another translation reads it this way, and I think it does a little bit better job. There is no use trying to bring you back to the Lord again if you have once understood the good news and tasted for yourselves of the good things of heaven and shared in the Holy Spirit and know how good the word of the Lord is and felt the mighty powers of the word to come and then have turned against God. You cannot bring yourself to repent again if you have nailed the Son of God to the cross again by rejecting Him, holding Him up to mocking and the public shame. And this passage, you run across people, and I've been talking to this one lady, once saved, always saved. These three verses are probably the best verses in the Bible, in my opinion, to use against once saved, always saved. So, is it difficult after you you come to the Lord and you reject the Lord, is it hard to come back? Yeah. The shame. Your attitude has to totally change. Now, comments or questions about that before we go on? I don't want to rush through this. Okay, we're going to be quiet this morning, apparently. But basically, it's a warning. You have to be careful. You shouldn't fall away. And if you do try to bring somebody back to God, it's hard. It's difficult. You just have to know that up front. And I think that's what the writer of Hebrews is trying to warn the Jews of this happening. Okay, continuing in verse 7. And the ground that drinks the rain, which often falls on it and produces vegetation, useful to those for those sake, it is also tilled, receiving a blessing from God. Now, we have two different situations, and I believe these two situations are describing you and me. And so, Are you the type of person that drinks up everything you hear spiritually, and you produce things, and the word vegetation many times is referred to as vegetables? Are you the type of person who listens to Jason, really soaks it in, and you learn, which is a good thing? Or are you the type of person in verse 8, but if you yield thorns and thistles, it is worthless and close to being cursed, and it ends up being burnt. Are you the type of person that listens to Jason and it just goes in one ear and out the other? Are you the type of person that produces bad things, bad attitudes, pessimistic thoughts, like Jason said this morning? Now, in verse 8, it says thistles. You know, we don't have a whole lot of thistles going on today, but I cut a big thistle bush out by the road the other day. And my ancestors, some of my ancestors had a last name of Disselkamp. And come to find out, Disselkamp comes from Germany, and the word means thistle fighters. So my family, ancestors, were farmers, and they lived over in Germany, and they had a thistle problem. I just think that's interesting. But thistles are something horrible. You don't want to have anything to do with thistles. They have thorns. They pull moisture out of the ground for the plants that you really want to see. And you don't want to have anything to do with thistles. How do you destroy thistles? If you just cut them down, what's going to happen to the seed? Seed goes back into the ground. You're going to have more thistles. So back in this day and time, they would burn the thistles. And it says, and it ends up being burnt. They did that back in that time because they wanted to burn the seed, to destroy the seed, so you don't have any thistles at all. So the question is, which kind of person are you? In verse 7, are you the person that just soaks up all the knowledge, spiritual? Or verse 8, are you the type of person that produces negative thoughts, bad things? Comments or questions down to verse 8? Yes?
I think that 4 through 8 is really hitting home at the dangers of being lukewarm.
Yes.
Those who are not leaning on the Holy Spirit, those who are not bearing fruit, that is dangerous and you will be caught up in the fire and burn. It's not just a black and white thing.
Yep.
You truly have to be on fire.
Absolutely. Good point. Great comment. Okay, now we kind of shift gears a little bit in verse 9. Words of encouragement. And I really like verse 9. Probably my favorite verse in Hebrews 6. And it says, "But beloved," now uses a tender term, beloved, "we are convinced of better things regarding you." You know, being a Jew, your family, you know, now that you're a Christian, maybe your family has rejected you a little bit, maybe you're ostracized a little bit, but the Hebrew writer is saying things are going to get better. Better things regarding you and the things that accompany salvation, even though we are speaking in this way. Now, he's also saying maybe better things can be expected from you. You know, you've been going along, and he's warning the dangers of falling away from the Lord. And he's basically saying, I know you can do better. Now, let me tell you a true story. In Pittsburgh, there is a college which is called Carnegie Mellon. And it's kind of an engineering school, very technical. And in this college, in the senior year, there's a professor there that he's tough. He's hard. And everybody knows his class is tough. And at the beginning of one semester, he gave the class a horrendous homework project. And you could just hear the sighs of like, oh, when he would tell in the class what the homework assignment was. And it was hard. And so the kids in the class got smart, and they kind of got together in work groups. And they were working on this horrendous project, and they worked, really hard. And it came time to turn in to the homework assignment to the professor, and they did that. And the professor looked at all what they had done, and he says to himself, "Wow, this is amazing." And then he started to think about it. Well, this is at the beginning of the semester. What am I going to do with the rest of the semester? They have already mastered this. And he kind of got depressed. And that went on for a few days. And then later, he went to an older, wiser professor. And he explained to him, this is terrible. What am I going to do? And the wiser professor kind of thought for a while, and he's told the professor this: you need to look them in the eye and tell them from the bottom of your heart, you did okay on that homework assignment, but I know you can do better. And he did that. And guess what? The class even did better than he ever hoped or dreamed of. And that's like us today. You're doing pretty good. You're here Sunday morning, Wednesday, Sunday night. This is good. But I know you can do better. And that's what the Hebrew writer, I think, is saying here in verse 9. You're doing good, but I see better things ahead in your life. And a lot of times, too, in today's society, as parents, we want our children to have nicer homes. We want our children to have nicer jobs. But here, that's not what they're talking about in verse 9. They're talking about spiritual things is going to be better for you. I know you can do better spiritually. Okay, any comments down to verse 10? Okay, verse 10. For God is not unjust as to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward His name by having served and by still serving the saints. And here the writer of Hebrews is saying, don't worry, God is not going to forget all the good things you have done. God's not going to forget about you cleaning the widow's gutters. God is not going to forget about the food that you brought to a family that needed some help. God is not going to forget about the card that you sent. God is not going to forget the Bible class that you had with this struggling brother or sister. God will always remember what you have done for Him. Period. Comments or questions down to verse 10. Man, you guys are quiet today. Okay, verse 11. And we desire that each one of you demonstrate the same diligence so as to realize the full assurance of hope until the end. Demonstrate. A few years ago, Debbie and I went to the Kentucky State Fair, and we were going through the booths, and she wanted to watch a demonstration of cookware. Okay, dear, let's go. And so I listened for about 45, 50 minutes of a demonstration of cookware. And I know everything about this cookware, let me tell you. the demonstration showed Debbie and I how good a cookware it was. The demonstration showed its ability. It showed what it can't do, what it can do. And that's the thing about us. And we desire that each one of you demonstrate your diligence. Demonstrate your full assurance. Having faith, having hope. So as Christians, we need to demonstrate what we believe, what we love, what we care about. Verse 13. Oh, no, I'm sorry, verse 12. So that you will not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and endurance inherit the promise. And the writer of Hebrews is saying, don't be sluggish. Now, what are some words that are similar to sluggish? Lazy. Good answer. What else? Don't drag your feet. So here we have sluggish. When I think of sluggish, I think of an animal. What animal do you think of when you think of sluggish? Yes. And how many people have seen Zootopia? You know what I'm going. You know where I'm going. Here we have a license bureau branch. And guess who runs the license bureau branch? Sloths. They are so slow. It's hilarious. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. Because they are so slow, it's funny. And so the writer of Hebrews is saying, don't be like a sloth. Don't be sluggish. Be active. And that's what we need to do as Christians. Now, in the last part of verse 12, it says endurance. I used to run track many years ago. My favorite race was the marathon. I love watching it on TV. Don't run it now. But I like to see that person with the endurance to finish 26 miles. That's amazing that a person can do that. And so here we are in this world, and we see an older Christian. And you've seen this. And it's wintertime, and there's snow on the ground. And boy, I don't know if we'll make it today. But here is that older individual who has the endurance to make it, even with some snow on the ground. I mean, I really appreciate that kind of attitude. I'm going to be here no matter what. They have endured the test of time. And that's a hard test. So the writer of Hebrews wants you not to be sluggish or lazy, and they want you to have the endurance. And now in verse 13, we shift gears a little bit differently, and now he's talking about the certainty of God's promise. And of all of God's promises, what promise just kind of leaps out at you in the Old Testament? Verse 13? Abraham, right. And for when God made the promise to Abraham, since he could not swear an oath by no one greater, he swore by himself. Nothing greater than God. Now, saying, indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply you. Now, what was that promise to Abraham? Through his seed, the world would be blessed. It is described, his descendants was described as the sands of the sea. It's unlimited virtually. It's you can't count it. There's so much sand in the sea, and Abraham's descendants is going to be like that. That is the certainty of God's promise. Now, if anybody could understand that, it's going to be Jews, because they are from Abraham. They could relate to that. Verse 15. And so, having patiently waited, he obtained the promise. How long did Abraham wait for that promise to be fulfilled? I'm sorry, what? 75 years? 25 years? It was a long time. Can you imagine waiting 25 years or whatever it was to have that first child? Now, today, are we patient? Probably not. I have 3 examples of patience. Have you ever gone to a grocery store? I'm sure you have. And you got all your groceries, and then you go out to the checkout line, and guess what? Well, line 1 has the long line. Well, I'm not interested in that. Well, go line 2. It's a shorter line, but boy, those baskets are really full. And in the third line, well, this person I don't think is very fast checking them out. Not interested in that. And so we get so impatient, we study which line is going to be the fastest. Have you ever done that? I think everyone has. My pet peeve. When I am at a stoplight and I'm the first person at the stoplight and it's red and I'm waiting for green and I'm watching that light like a hawk, and as soon as it turns green, guess what happens? The guy behind me honks at me. That is so frustrating. And you're trying to get out as soon as you can, and as soon as that light, he has no patience whatsoever. And the third example, this is kind of relatively recent, but have you ever bought something at Amazon? Well, we probably all have. And you know what I do sometimes? Well, I order it, and 2 hours later, guess what I do? I check the Amazon website to see if it's delivered yet. Or, no, where's it at? Is it out of the warehouse? And then 2 hours later, I check it again. Sometimes I check that Amazon package 3 times a day, because why? I'm impatient. And the Hebrew writer is saying, if Abraham waited 25 years, you need to be patient with other people. And sometimes that's hard to do. Verse 16, for people swear by an oath, by one greater than themselves, and the oath serving the confirmation is an end of every dispute. The word confirmation there is a legal term that means legally guaranteed. Verse 17, in the same way, God desired even more to demonstrate to the heirs of the promise of the fact that His purpose is unchangeable, confirmed it with an oath. God, when He says something, He means it. It's a done deal. You can count it. You can take it to the bank. Verse 18. So that 2 unchangeable things, and we find those 2 unchangeable things through verses 18 through 20. The 2 unchangeable things, it is impossible for God to lie. We who have taken refuge, and boy, if anybody would know about refuge, it would be the Jews, because you had those cities of refuge back in the Old Testament, would have strong encouragement to hold firmly to the hope set before us. So, since God can't lie, if God says something, you can take it to the bank. Verse 19, this hope we have as an anchor of the soul of hope, both sure and reliable, and the one that enters within the veil. Did you know, this is a pearl of knowledge, I love to get pearls of knowledge, but did you know back in this day and time, a Roman coin and a Greek coin, if it had an anchor on it, guess what it meant? It meant hope. So it makes a lot of sense that the writer of Hebrews knew, and this hope we have as an anchor. Isn't that neat that he ties that into the coinage back in the first century? Where Jesus has entered as a forerunner for us. Now, when I think of a forerunner, I think, the king is coming. And there's a person ahead of him shouting out saying, yes, the king is coming. Or the forerunner when a president comes into town and he has a motorcade and there's lights flashing, and it's the forerunner saying that, yeah, this is the president coming. Now, who in Jesus' life was a forerunner for him? John the Baptist. Exactly. And the forerunner for us, having become a high priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Two things. First, it's impossible for God to lie, and Christ is our high priest under the order of Melchizedek. And so Christ has gone ahead to plead for us as our high priest. Jews could relate to that, more so than Gentiles. And so that is, I think, once a year, the high priest would enter into the most holy place. But God has determined that Jesus will be our high priest forever. Jews, once again, could relate to that. They could understand that. Okay, just a few more minutes. What questions or comments do you all have? As Sergeant Carter on Gomer Pyle would say, I can't hear you. Anything else? Well, the Lord willing, Nathan will do a wonderful job in Hebrews the 7th chapter, and then I'll do Hebrews the 8th chapter. Thank you very much for your paying attention. Thank you.